my dad passed away. Not only did he pass along his fishing boat, but he also passed along his love of fishing to me. The boat is a Rodman 1250, which has a decent-sized cabin, allowing me to go overnight deep-sea fishing. I usually fish off the coast of Mississippi, and would sail for an hour out to sea, then stop and spend the rest of the day fishing. That's exactly what I did one Friday, taking my cousin Jack. I planned on spending the night and fishing most of Friday, then sailing back. So after sailing out to sea for about an hour, I picked a spot for us to stop and cast our lines. We brought a radio and tons of beers to make the time more pleasant. The sun started to set, and seeing the sun setting in the horizon with no visual intrusions was a beautiful sight. Perhaps the last pleasant thing that would happen that night. By the time the sky was completely dark, we had already packed our stuff for the night and were inside the cabin playing cards and eating burgers. Mid-conversation, Jack stopped me and told me to listen. There was the sound of a boat motor out in the distance. We left the cabin to look into the horizon, but with no moon. It was just too dark to see more than maybe 50 feet in front of us. But over the calm waves, we did hear a boat motor. Whoever was out there didn't have their lights on. The lights in my cabin were on, which was definitely enough for anyone to see us and avoid hitting us. We were expecting the sound of the other boat to sail away into the night. However, it seemed to circle us for a bit, then abruptly stop. The motor just cut, and there was nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing against the boat. Jack started acting a little paranoid. He thought we were being stalked. He wanted me to use the spotlight to look for where this boat could be. I didn't want to do that because that would be a bit obnoxious and obvious. To make him happy, though, I started to drive the boat for a few minutes away from the last direction we heard that engine stop. Although, maybe I did it because I was a little suspicious about it as well. After a solid 5 minutes of driving the boat in the opposite direction, I killed the motor and we went back inside the cabin to resume playing cards. It felt like only seconds after we sat down, we heard it again. This time I heard it first, but it sounded like the motor was being given much less gas. We went outside again, and at that instant, the sound stopped. This time I agreed with Jack. Turning on the spotlight was a necessity now. The spotlight only rotated 180 degrees, so I turned the boat a little to the right so that I could point the light out in the direction we heard the boat. The beam of light shot far into the horizon. I felt my heart racing as I slowly turned the light to point more to the right, and finally I stopped when the light started to land on a boat floating not too far away from us. I turned the light off at once and told Jack to turn the cabin lights off as well. I put the boat in full throttle and sped away from the area. I steered the boat for about 5 to 10 minutes before thinking it was enough. We hung out outside for a while to ensure we weren't followed again. When it seemed safe to do so, we went to sleep. However, I awoke to a thumping coming from above my head, above the cabin. I looked over at Jack, sleeping on the couch. I whispered his name a few times to wake him up, and I pointed up at the ceiling. He looked up, then back at me, with a look on his face telling me he heard the thumps. I opened the door to the deck and ran outside, and saw 2 men, one on the bow of my boat, the other on a boat floating directly next to mine. Jack came running out behind me. Both of the men slowly put their hands up in front of their faces and claimed they meant no harm. The one on my boat said they were simply almost out of gas and needed help. He said he was going to knock on my cabin door to ask for assistance, but in my head I was thinking, why was he on the bow of my boat then? I very low-key flicked Jack's thigh to indicate to him that I was getting ready to do something rash. The guy stepped down from the front of the boat to the lower deck, right in front of Jack and I. He was significantly taller and bigger than us. He looked at me for a few moments, then reached out his hand, expecting a handshake without saying anything. I knew something was about to go down with these guys, and for all I knew, that could start with my shaking his hand. Instead of shaking his hand, I pushed the guy overboard into the water with all my strength. Then I ran up the stairs to turn the boat on, while I yelled at Jack to make sure they didn't get back on the boat. We were able to lose them in the night for good this time. I didn't stop though. I kept going the full 2 hours straight back to the shore. We made it back to my dock, and we slept on my boat that night. The next morning we packed up and drove home. Strange things can happen out at sea in the dark, but I never anticipated anything like that. I don't know what those guys were planning on doing to us on my boat, but considering they had been making a point of stalking us, I know it was nothing good.